Hello and welcome. This is going to be the intro to yoga video. So if you're new to yoga altogether, if you're relatively new, or you just haven't practiced in a long time and need a refresher, this will be a nice reminder or introduction to some basic principles for yoga. So I would say probably the most important thing about a yoga practice, especially when you're starting out, is the relationship between breathing and movement. And so a lot of times people who are new to yoga can get a little worried about, am I breathing at the right time? Or I can't inhale and exhale when the instructor says. It's okay. Don't worry. The most important thing is that you're breathing and not holding your breath. So throughout the yoga videos to come, you'll hear me say, inhale, reach your arms up over your head, or something like that. Exhale, fold forward. If you find that you need to breathe more often than I cue, please do. Don't worry if you're exhaling when I say inhale and vice versa. Just use it as a general gauge. If you need to throw in another extra round of breath or two in between, it's completely fine. The most important thing is that you find a rhythm of breathing that is effortless, that we're not gripping or holding the breath, and then it just kind of over time starts to ease in and out. It's not going to be that way on your first try. It wasn't for me. It wasn't for anybody I know who ever tried yoga for the first time. So just don't worry too much about it. It's going to be fine. Another few things that might be handy if you happen to have them, something like a yoga strap. And that can be a scarf, a sock, a towel, a belt. If you don't have anything like that, it's also perfectly fine, but it's nice to have. Sometimes if maybe you can't quite reach your foot and you need something to put around the foot to bring it closer. Same thing if we're kind of doing a stretch like this where you reach back for your hands and you can't grab your hands. No problem if you don't have anything. You can also just use your shirt. So it's something that's nice to have, but if you don't, it's definitely okay. Another thing is a blanket. Any kind of blanket will do, and that's just a nice option or choice if you need a little extra padding underneath your knee. Sometimes when you're new to yoga and we're on our knees, it can feel a little uncomfortable or unfamiliar. Just a choice. And then finally, some kind of a pillow, a couch pillow, your pillow from your bedroom, anything like that. Again, that can just be handy and is not necessary if you don't have it. So, all of that said, I'm going to set these to the side for now and just go through a few basic concepts and postures. You'll hear me say things throughout these classes like pull your belly button into your spine or something like that. And if you don't really have a good reference for what those things mean, I'm just going to go through a few basic concepts here with you guys. So, and a few basic shapes. So first, very often, we'll start off in a tabletop shape. So that's going to be on all fours. And you can just watch or do this along with me if you like. So in this tabletop shape, your knees are going to be separated to about your 2 fists width distance. That's typically your anatomical inner hip width distance. So they're not super close together and they're not really far apart. If you need more width than your 2 fists to feel like you're at hips distance, that's totally fine. So your fingers are spread wide. Middle finger is facing forward. The shoulders are stacked over the wrists, and the hips are stacked over the knees. So the feet, they want to kind of be straight out from the knees. So if you were to take a peek in between your knees, the toes wouldn't be touching together. They would sort of disappear behind the tops of the thighs. Be mindful not to lock out in your elbow, just a little, not bent like this, but just soft. You'll hear me say a lot of times, crown of head from tailbone, or lengthen your spine. So what that means is that you feel as though the crown of the head, the top of the head, is pulling forward, And the sacrum, or the tailbone, is pulling backwards. The spine grows long. Low belly in and up, or belly button to spine, just means that on our exhale we feel those muscles engaging as if you could pull your belly button through towards your spine without kind of rounding and tucking. So it's just that engagement of the low abdominal muscles. And it feels a little more natural over time. Now if you're here on all fours with me and you notice that your hands don't want to be flat, that some of your knuckles are kind of tenting upwards, that is common and it's okay. Over time, the hands will flatten out. But we just kind of want to encourage the base knuckles of the first finger and thumb to press gently downward. And again, don't worry about it if it's not coming right away. Your toes behind you, there will be times when I say that can either be tops of feet down or toes tucked under. You'll hear me cue very often, tuck your toes under. So that's what that means, just to put the pads of the toes down. And then oftentimes I'll say it's your choice, whatever helps you feel more stable. So just moving through some basic breath to movement here. Two common shapes that you'll see quite often are cat and cow. So cow, you kind of soften the belly down towards the mat, lifting the tailbone and lifting the heart and the gaze upward. It's also helpful to think about your shoulder blades squeezing together and then sliding down your back into your imaginary back pockets. So the belly is soft, the back body is engaged, the gaze is up. And this is our inhale. We breathe in while the belly softens. Breathe deep and down into the big belly breath. And then the exhale, we press the floor away, round the back, tuck the chin and tuck the tailbone. This is our cat pose. And we usually do that several times. So inhaling to cow, exhaling to cat, and so on and so forth. Again, if you need to breathe some extra times through those cycles, don't worry. And then you'll hear me say, come back to a neutral spine, which just means that your spine is not bent in one direction or the other. Child's pose. So this is also a very common shape in your yoga practice. So now we do bring the toes towards one another. So your big toes come to touch and your knees walk out a little bit wider. You'll sit your hips back towards your heels. They may not touch, and that's okay. And then we walk the hands out so that the arms rest down on the floor and your forehead rests down on the mat. Now if yours looks a little bit more like this or like this, that's okay. And that's where these blankets and pillows can come in kind of handy. If your hips just aren't quite sitting back towards the heels yet, and it's uncomfortable to be in that shape, option is to pad underneath the knees with a blanket and stick a pillow in between your butt and your legs and just rest down like this. If the head doesn't quite reach down, that's okay. You can kind of stack your fists and rest down like that. Or if that feels like too much support, then you can just take that blanket or pillow in between the seat and the heels and rest down. It's pretty common for people to hold tension in their arms here, like having the elbows up, floating up off of the floor. I encourage you to treat this like a resting posture and just relax back into it. Typically in class, when we're in child's pose, that's a moment of rest. And it's also a posture where if we're moving through class and you just need a break, you can kind of hang back into child's pose. If child's pose does not feel restful for you, then just find any comfortable shape to rest in. It's definitely okay to do that throughout class. So one more shape that I'll show you here in this video is pretty common. It's called downward facing dog. So a great way to approach downward facing dog is to start in your tabletop. Walk your hands about one handprint forward so that the wrists come forward of the plane of the shoulders. Then we tuck our toes under and then come into cow. So belly sinks down, inhale. And then send the hips back and up as you exhale into this inverted V shape that's called downward facing dog. Now, a few things that are very common for beginners. The hands don't want to be flat. They're kind of tented up. So again, that comes over time. Just do your best. You don't want to overload your wrists. So be mindful not to have all the weight in the hands. We want to pretty much be evenly distributed between hands and feet. It's also pretty common to feel your hands sliding forward. It's because your body is not quite used to the shape yet, and your core is not engaging in the way that it should be to be supportive of you in this shape. So in an ideal world, when we're in downward facing dog, you want to press your hands down and slightly back towards your feet. Not to actually move the hand, but maybe just to move the skin of the hand. That's going to allow you to engage in your triceps and your serratus muscles. So it's almost as if you could imagine, rather than being on a yoga mat, my hands were on one blanket and my feet were on a different blanket on a slippery floor. And if I were to push forward with my hands and back with my feet, I would slide and land on my belly. As opposed to that, I want to squeeze hands towards feet, feet towards hands. The belly is really going to start to work a lot here so that would hold you up. It takes a lot of practice, so don't worry if you're engaging those muscles and your hands are still sliding forward. Don't worry, it's going to be fine. Another couple things in this shape. A lot of people mistakenly think of this as a resting pose. It's not, it's very active. You can probably hear I'm kind of out of breath trying to hold the shape and talk at the same time. So we keep that same distance. Hands are at shoulder width. Your feet are at hip width. A lot of people really worry about how straight their legs are and how low their heels are. We think that that's like this goal to achieve in our yoga practice. Don't worry about it. I actually encourage you for many years, if not forever, to have somewhat of a bend in the knees. It's more important that your ischial tuberosities, your sitting bones, are going up towards the ceiling. So what do I mean by that? You don't want your low back to be rounded or your pelvis to be tucked here. You want to think of your sitting bones pressing up towards the sky and apart from one another. And that's a lot easier to do if you have a bend in the knees. So if you feel like you're hunched way forward and your tail's tucked way under and your down dog looks a little more like this, bend the knees more, press your chest towards your thighs, send those sitting bones up and just relax your head and let it dangle. As for the angle of the upper arms, you might have heard people say something like, spin your biceps forward, triceps back, or wrap your shoulder blades around towards your rib cage. And so basically what that means is that we're bringing the upper arms into external rotation as opposed to internal rotation. So looking at it from this angle, let me back up so you can kind of see my hands. So if I'm in my downward facing dog and my shoulders are hiked way up by my ears and my elbows are way out to the side, number one, that's going to overload the joints of the elbows and the wrists, and you're internally rotating in the shoulder joint. We want to focus more on external rotation, so spinning those biceps forward, triceps back, so that the eyes of the elbows, your elbow pit, face more forward. And again, that just happens over time. So those are just a few basic mechanics of some of our more foundational shapes. I hope this has been helpful. I can't wait to get started with you. I'm so glad you're here.